Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ dhammāṃ saṅghāṃ namasami.
Thank you, John, for the wonderful meditation and lecture. You brought up 3 foundations of mindfulness, and I had just been reading about the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Is there a difference between those in Theravada versus Mahayana, or are they similar?
Thank you. So the Buddha called the establishings of mindfulness the domain. It's a safe domain, and he said if you wander outside of that domain, you wander into Mara's clutches. So there's something very powerful about this practice of coming back to just looking at the body and the body, feelings as feelings, this is painful, this is pleasurable, and just that much, and not proliferating. And then the state of the mind, contracted, angry, distressed. And it is fun to overlay it onto this. And the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta is an explicit ladder of how to use those 3 foundations to cultivate pleasure, calm, and then insight. I think there is a difference between the first 3 and the last one. The last foundation is mindfulness of dhammas, or dhamma categories. So it's one becomes aware, one remains mindful of the 5 hindrances of sloth and torpor, restlessness, sensual desire, anger, etc. Of the enlightenment factors, these bright qualities of mind, rapture, equanimity, etc. And then in the traditional sutta, it goes on into a lot of other lists, which are useful. But if you use comparative studies, you see that probably what the Buddha included in that 4th foundation was actually just the 5 hindrances, these blocks to meditative calm, like sensual desire, sloth and torpor, restlessness, and the enlightenment factors, these like indicators of the bright, luminous mind. And that really simplifies it, because it's saying with the other foundations, you're really looking at your experience just as this much. A feeling is just pleasurable, just painful, and if you just know it as such, it lets you take a step back and not react to it. And Ajahn Sucitta says mindfulness is hovering 1 inch above the ground, and that 1 inch is everything, though. It gives you that slight distance. But the 4th foundation is connecting our experience, those other foundations, to the Dharmic teachings. So maybe you have a pleasant feeling, but perhaps it's pleasure predicated on loving a cinnamon roll or something. And granted, that's worldly pleasurable feeling, which is in the 2nd foundation, but also noticing, that's, if you bring that 4th foundation, you can say, this is sensual desire. Whereas maybe you have a sense of pleasure from metta practice, and really saying, that's, actually, I see that imbued with these enlightenment factors. So it's kind of more overlaying value judgments, like those do exist in the other satipatthanas, but it is more of a somewhat cognitive overlay, where you're really connecting your experience to the teachings and seeing what to cultivate and what to abandon. Whereas the first 3 are very immediate ways of being with your experience, if that makes sense. Does that sort of hit the spot at all, or speak to that?
Yeah, it does. And I was actually, the way I was putting it together was that the 3rd and 4th had to do with mind, and the 1st is body, the 2nd is feeling, and the 3rd and 4th were more mind.
Yes. The 4th, and the 3rd explicitly is mind states, but you're right, the 4th has a lot to do with that, but the 4th really can overlay onto the other 3 as well, so, yeah.
Thank you, Ajahn. I had a question about mindfulness in the moment of falling asleep. That's a really interesting time to have mindfulness of mind as all the filters start falling off. But it also, I find that being mindful of the breath or the body in that time of falling asleep helps calm like some anxieties, calm the body so it is more able to fall asleep. But then there's also a moment where it switches, where mindfulness keeps me awake. And there's a release that has to happen, like a trust that the mind will calm down. I'll see a lot of really interesting stuff, but try not to let that wake me back up. So how do you navigate that falling asleep, mindful letting go, but also like when I talk to other people, I describe it as like when the frontal cortex comes, the filter of that comes off, the mind just puts all kinds of really interesting things together, like banana and cats. Oh, this is genius. Why didn't I think of this before? And then like the thinking mind comes back on and is like, no. But so there's like this dance of, there's a lot happening in falling asleep. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, there's a funny story of Ajahn Chah. There's a new novice at Wapapong, and Ajahn Chah said, okay, what breath did you fall asleep on? And so for the next few weeks, the novice was like trying to get it right every time and preparing. And then it was a few weeks later and he was ready for the question. And Ajahn Chah turned to him and said, all right, what breath did you wake up on? And then, yeah, I think a few things. That balance between control and letting go is a very interesting one. And it's one that I think is very problematic for most moderns. And it's why in the meditation, I said, you know, at some point, the Buddha said you should interact with wholesome mind states, like, he said you should interact with unwholesome mind states, like a cow herd would herd a cow before the rice had been harvested. So he's constantly tapping the cow so it doesn't get into the weeds. And he should interact with the mind states that are wholesome, like a cow herd after the rice has all been harvested. And he sits under a tree and says, and this is a quote from the Sutta, there are those cows, you know? And I love that. And so it's interesting, like at the beginning, meditation can be quite directed, you know, like here's how you circulate the breath in this chamber, in this chamber, in this chamber. But after time, that becomes very heavy-handed. You're like constantly hitting the cows, and the cows are like, they're fine. They know what to do. And that's why I think at some point it's really good to learn to like change your interaction with the meditation to much more releasing into that pasture or that chamber, and then just trust the cows. Like they know to run in a circle or do whatever they're going to do. And that's a really important transition, and it requires a significant shift in. There's a real key moment in a meditation, I find, where you have to make that conscious decision of like, oh, there's too much vitakka vichara, directed thought. I need to just listen to the ringing of the bell. And maybe you direct the mind every 60 seconds, but then you step back and just listen. And with falling asleep, I find it can be the same thing. If you're really trying to kind of stay mindful on one point, there does come a point where you need to release. And I think either you can just acknowledge things can get a little weird there and it can be a little awkward, there's not a way around it. But also the Buddha really recommended loving kindness for going to sleep. He said, a benefit of loving kindness, the 11 benefits: one sleeps easily, wakes easily, dreams no evil dreams. One is dear to human and non-human beings. One has a bright complexion. When one dies unconfused. And also, arrows, fire, and poison can't hurt one. So that would be great. A lot of arrows around here. But sleeps easily. And I think that sense of like, loving kindness has a quality where you don't always have to be pinpointing on it. It lets you kind of sink into it. And I think it lets you release the cognitive load in a way that other meditations don't. I think it's also why if people go into the workspace, often if they try to keep mindfulness of the breath the whole time, it's too fragile. You can't, do spreadsheets and be mindful of your breath the whole time. It's like you're trying to point the flashlight of awareness at the breath and then at the spreadsheet, and then the breath and the spreadsheet. the amazing thing about the Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, it actually just changes the flashlight. Like if I'm with someone's in a conversation, I don't know how this relates to spreadsheets. Allison is the accountant, but with like a conversation, instead of being like, I have to be with my breath and with this conversation, you can be like, I'm gonna try to be here in the most loving way I can to my coworker right now. Like, what gift can I give in this conversation? And you're 100% there, but you've changed the whole quality of the light you're shining. And what can happen is if you really are in a very intense environment of the world, which is just intense, and you go into it with that intention of a bodhisattva, like I want to be here as a gift to the world, what you might find is you go down to sit meditation at the end of the day, and there's no residue. It's like you can completely sink in. So the Brahma Viharas are very special meditations. And I think they're what you should go to sleep on, and the cognitive load can fall away, but you just come to rest in this metta. And when you wake up, you can also watch that similar moment of scrambling for a self to coalesce around. And that's when, and I've said this before, you need to be really guarded and like immediately go to loving kindness, establish in the heart for the first 15 minutes of your day, because that will pay dividends through the rest of the day. And if you, as you age and lose your memory, people wonder what happens, but if you've cultivated the Brahma Viharas, you know, it's like maybe the mind becomes foggy, but it's like sunrise into a cloud bank. It just illuminates the fog into brightness. And there's a monk named Mahagosananda who Aya Santusiga gave a talk about last week. And Longpo Pasano met him when his memory had completely gone. He couldn't have a conversation or anything. But he said he was an avatar of pure metta. He couldn't converse or anything, but all that was left when everything else was gone was just the Brahma Viharas, that loving kindness quality. So, yeah, if I could recommend 10 minutes of any meditation a day, like loving kindness will change a life with 10 minutes a day. But for the rest of us who meditate more, it's still what you should go to bed on and wake up on. Even before you move after waking up, just bring awareness to the heart and get a glow going there. So, help.
Thank you.
We have Ed on Zoom.
Ed, go for it.
Thank you, Ajahn. Just thinking about the 5 hindrances, could you speak for a moment about mental formations? And if you're really feeling ambitious, maybe consciousness.
I babysat Ed's kids as a young lad. So, Ed, do you mean the 5 aggregates, khandas?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, yeah. That's a big question. So who here knows the 5 aggregates of clinging? So these are the focal points of identity. What's the first? Body. Second? Feeling, Vedana. Third? Perception. Fourth? Saṅkhāra, mental formations, stuff. It's hugely hard to translate. And fifth is consciousness, viññana. Okay, good. Way to go, team. So the Buddha taught a radical phenomenology where these 5 aggregates are all processes. And in the Buddhist time, khanda could be used as an aggregate of flame. So it's a process feeding off of fuel, and it's how we create the sense of a self, coalescing around one of these. So maybe, you feel quite wounded, and you're the victim, and that has a lot of that feeling quality and other things as well. And the first 3 are pretty easy. We attach to the body. This is me and mine. It's a beautiful body. It's an ugly body. It's not good enough. It's gorgeous, whatever. Feeling, this is so painful, and just completely grabbing onto that and saying, like, I will get away from this pain however I can. That's kind of positing a self in terms of investing the heart and feeling, Vedana. Perception, just I'm the extrovert, I'm a victim, I'm better than, less than. Perception. But sankhara, the 4th, mental formation, is the hardest to translate. So well done, Ed. And what it is, it means basically it's the concoctor, the concoction, and the act of concocting all in one. And there's a sutta called the Gajaniya Sutta where the Buddha speaks to all these things as process. He says, form, why is it called form? Because it's deformed. Deformed by what? Deformed by heat, by cold, by burning and creeping things. Feeling, why is it called feeling? Because it feels. What does it feel? Pleasure, pain, neutral. Perception, why is it called perception? Because it perceives. Mental formations, why are they called mental formations? Because they form. What do they form? They form body for the sake of body. They form feeling for the sake of feelings, etc. So what that means is, what mental formations does is it takes all the other aggregates and concocts them into a program that it runs. It constellates them into an experience with real power and momentum. So maybe you see your loved one didn't do the dishes. So there's the feeling of anger, Vedana, unpleasant. There's a tightness in the chest, that's the body. There's the perception of like, great, guess I'm the martyr again who has to do the dishes. That's perception. And all those things, sankhara, it's a program and it's ready to run. And that's what sankhara takes all those and it snowballs them into a really, that snowball of not doing the dishes can run over a whole evening. And so how you interact with sankhara, it takes all the others and it runs it. So the way to work with sankhara is the Buddha compared it to a banana tree. And banana trees, they have no heartwood. They're just wrapped leaves, like an onion almost. And what you do with sankhara is just untangle it. Say, oh, okay, we have perception, my loved one is lazy, I'm a victim, whatever. We have the feeling, unpleasant feeling. I have this tightness in the chest. And you're unraveling the constellation of sankhara until the whole plantain tree, the whole banana tree, the onion, is just laid out. And hopefully you aren't crying, because that is what happened with onions. Yeah, you just get rid of its momentum. So that's sankhara, and it can create a lot of karma. If you buy into it, it has such power, it's momentum. So that's sankhara, and it's the impulse as well behind that. And then consciousness, that's the fifth aggregate. The Buddha said the first four aggregates, form, feeling, perception, sankhara, are the building blocks of experience. The fifth, consciousness, takes those building blocks and tastes it. It's the subject. And the Buddha said those first four, and which are called namarupa and consciousness, lean up against each other, mutually dependent, like two bundles of reeds. So consciousness is what feels again and again, oh, pain, etc., and gets colored by it. And so with viññana, consciousness, just stepping back into that awareness again and again, because it's a safer harbor. It's not totally safe until you're completely awakened, but instead of buying into these other things, if you do step back into mindfulness, you're to some extent stepping back into consciousness. And then, yeah, I'm not going to go any farther into that. So that's the aggregates. Did that help, Ed? Clear as mud?
Don't buy the storyline.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good, that's simpler. Do that, exactly. Condense everything I said into that. Okay. Oh, please.
I think you started to answer this question over here, but I'd like a little more, which is about the development of patience. Not just patience in one's life, but patience in one's path.
So the word for patience in Buddhism is khanti, and the Ajahn Nisabho lovingly translates it as a peaceful coexistence with the unwished for. And you can't wait for something to end and have patience at the same time. So it's not just gritting your teeth, although it can be that. There are times. And the agent form of the word khanti is khantar, and that's how that was a word for an elephant in the Buddhist time. I really like that. Like, does an elephant stand, And I think there's a few ways of touching that word that are skillful. First, the Buddha labeled it as the supreme incinerator of defilement, the supreme quality, which is so helpful because instead of all these like very refined qualities of heart, some of which we just don't have access to, like I don't always have loving kindness for everyone around me, but patience is always accessible, and it's such a grounded, powerful object. And there's just some motions of our life, some things that happen where, sometimes you really can look from a bird's eye view and say, okay, I get it. This is part of my practice. I see why I'm having to move through this. But other times you're just in the middle of the storm, just trying to keep your head together. And for times like that quality of patience is so helpful. So I'd say patience should be associated with listening. And this is why that elephant quality, they have big ears. But the Four Noble Truths, how you listen to which noble truth you're touching and orient is a key quality in patience. Because if you orient towards the noble truth that's in your life right at that time correctly, there's not that sense of disjunct. Like it's the first noble truth of understanding suffering. One problem is when people come out of retreat or something like a meditation retreat, they've just been in the third noble truth of peace. And they just want to ride that plane all the way to Nibbana. And you don't get to do that. You have all four noble truths. They're all right there. And the problem is that when the suffering hits, they're not agile enough to realize, actually, I'm no longer in the third noble truth now. This isn't peace. This is suffering. And the duty is different. The duty with suffering is to understand it and place caring hands on your suffering and to stand under your suffering. That's how Longpo Sumedho says, to understand suffering, you have to stand under it. And just feel like, this is what it feels like to hurt. This is the human experience of difficulty. I see how it's based on craving, the second noble truth, and letting go of that is how it releases. But also just understanding that often if you really touch that difficulty of life, it wears away your hard edges. Like understanding suffering and being with it is the route towards humility. And humility is a love of reality. And with suffering, there's nothing wrong with the world. It's our orientation and wanting it to be otherwise that always is the disjunct and the deeper. So I'd say that with khanti, you can be with great suffering, but it really helps if you know that your duty at that time is to understand it. And there's some periods of your life where your whole duty is just to keep putting one foot in front of the other and keep your head down, and that's okay. There's times like that. So I'd say, finding the right, being willing to move back to the first noble truth really helps with khanti. And then just to acknowledge that there's one aspect of the path is you're giving up what you've known for what you don't know. And the taste of the world and the things we've known are coarse, and they take a while to clear from the tongue. And there's this dark space between when you give something up, that dark valley, and the light that comes on the other side. And that's a really hard place to hold still through. And that's where patience is key, because there's a delayed gratification. My parents would make me say that when I was a little kid. They say, "Can you say delayed gratification?" Delayed gratification. And there's this beautiful T.S. Eliot poem from the Four Quartets line where he says, "Wait without hope, because hope would be hope for the wrong thing. Wait without love, because love would be love of the wrong thing. There is still faith, but the faith and the hope and the love are all in the waiting. The faith and the hope and the love are all in the waiting." And there's just some periods where you just have to hold still enough, keep your sila, keep practicing, have faith that things will change, and the light does begin to circulate in, but Sometimes you have to wait through that dark subway tunnel, for a time. Did that help at all? Okay.
We have Mary Webster on Zoom.
Mary, please.
Hi, Ajahn. Hello, everybody. My question is very vague. It's very loose, but both you and Ajahn Kovalo have been using awareness lately, awareness of the body. So the question is generally like to help understand awareness a little bit more, because awareness seems to be outside. The body can exist in awareness. The awareness can be inside. It's aware of this internal stuff. So it seems to be this glue that holds together these things that you were just talking about. Am I in a Brahma Vihara? Am I in a hell realm? Where, there's an awareness that is a knower of all of this that is tossed around rather loosely. So anything that you can say on that, Ajahn, thank you.
Great question. So a few things. One is the Buddha taught not just sati, mindfulness, which is bringing something into kind of establishing recollectedness and keeping it in mind. But there's a story of a monk who was so mindful of his footsteps that he just walked straight past the street into a yard. And that's where awareness, sampajanya, which is clear comprehension, is another word for it, is important. And that's the broader context of what you're doing. Like, oh, there's a turn here. I've heard it said like mindfulness is sweeping with the front end of the broom, and sampajanya, awareness, is knowing that the back end of your broom, if it's a long tie broom, is not going to hit someone. So it's this sort of broader stepping back that's a bit more broad context. So that's one way of using it. But I think also, we're using it in the sense, yes, of just holding different things in experience, and this quality of stepping back into sati sampajanya, mindfulness, is stepping back into the knowing to some extent. And there is a sense of stability there, like awareness isn't as changed as the objects of awareness. And you all might remember Aya Suchita saying that sutta she loved, one excellent night, one does not revive the past nor speculate on what's to come. Here, just here, one plainly sees, attentive to every presently arisen state, this insight is one's strength. And when doubt comes up or jealousy, instead of trying to solve the problem, being like, okay, gosh, I'm really, I'm not as good as this person or something, just stepping back into mindfulness of feeling, like, oh, painful, jealousy, ow. That's stepping back into awareness. But the final thing to note is the Buddha, I've heard it compared to like attention is the thumb. The four fingers are things like perception, nama, basically, perception, intention, etc. And the palm is the chitta of awareness. And what happens often is the palm is touching and kind of the five aspects of cognition grab an object and hold it, press it into the chitta so it tastes it. But when samadhi becomes powerful, the five gather into the palm and are held there in one luminous singularity. And that's when we start talking about awareness as an object in itself, is because it gathers enough momentum and brightness that you can actually begin to step into awareness as its own foundation and object of samadhi. So that's when there's no object held anymore. It's just gathered into one unified mind state. Does that address anything of what you're asking, Mary?
Really, really well, Ajahn.
Okay.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Super.
So especially this last part, that awareness can be the object itself.
Yeah.
And that awareness is different than consciousness of. This is the broader one that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's difficult
Yeah.
because the Buddha never gives you a final place to step back into apart from Nibbana. He just says, keep stepping back into the knowing of the knowing of the knowing.
Okay.
So yeah, as soon as you take awareness as an object, you're being aware of the awareness. So there's another level to step back. And
Yeah.
you basically back yourself into a corner, and then the wall breaks, and then apparently you're awakened. But
Maybe so.
exactly. But it's really useful that if you're using breath meditation, the Buddha often spoke about 4 elements like breath, solidity. That's what usual breath meditation is. But sometimes the Buddha spoke about 2 additional elements, space and consciousness. And what you might find is that if once meditation is refined enough, sticking with those first 4 of just the breath, it feels claustrophobic. And it's because the mind has become quite luminous and expanded. And that's when I find you can just invoke that 6th element of consciousness and let the mind expand out and just rest in bright, luminous awareness. And so, yeah, even in a kind of mundane meditation, you can really use that recollection somewhat, I think.
Thank you so much, Ajahn.
Great.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mary.
You spoke last week, you mentioned that the last thing you can take away from someone is their suffering. And that when you get to a place where you've had a recognition of that, then you need to work on gladdening the mind to supplant. And so, can you speak on the practices of gladdening the mind?
Wow, what a good question, Jen. So, just to review, what I was saying is sometimes, and I was using a meditation scenario for this, the mind becomes very calm. And dukkha is an interesting word. It translates as suffering, but it also means stress or perturbation, like a knot, palpitation. So like, you'll notice as the mind becomes calm, there's all these kind of knots that arise, and then a thought will bubble up from the knot. And so all those knots are dukkha, actually. Like, they're very refined dukkha, little stress points. And as you release them, as that kind of circulation, for example, massages them all out, and there's just this clear flowing stream, often it's very disoriented. You end up with, you've had this unconscious mental model of your body and your suffering and your future and past and depressions and worries, and suddenly it's all gone. And it can be quite frightening. You start to flail. And for me, at the end, this is at the end of step 8 of the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta, where it's like mental activity is calmed. And people's impulse, and what we're talking about with Jen here, is at that point just to kind of stay there and try to just wait until things get calmer. And often it really doesn't work. And in the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta, it says first you have to gladden the mind, and then you can concentrate the mind. So what I find then is actually if you drop in a word of loving kindness or a perception of light, the mind becomes very luminous, it's very suggestible, and then it's willing to consolidate into calm. So roots to that gladdening. If the mind's calm, I find the word love is very simple. And, love, forgiveness, something like that. I use the word God. Christian language has a very deep impact on me still. I grew up with it. So I use the word God sometimes. That brings to mind a lot of light. That's a whole other discussion for Buddhism. But another root is, if we talked about this last time, but there's a very subtle doorway to loving kindness hidden at the heart chakra, to use that language, like right above the heart in the middle of the chest. We spoke about this last time. But if awareness is very delicate, like it's really pinpointed there, just find that. Like you're moving a finger over the pulse, and find that tenderness and then let it grow. Another one, and this is what Lee Brasington recommends, bring a gentle smile when the mind is calm and is rested on the breath. And there's a sort of subtle sense of brightening with the smile. And if you make that the focus of awareness, you transition to that being your object, it's like holding a mic up to a speaker. The rapture, it might be quite little at first, but if you put awareness on it, it will brighten the awareness, and the awareness becomes more powerful on that. And that little spark of the brightened smile area can pretty much launch you into a lot of brightness, actually. There's also hidden pleasure points in the body. The palms often are one, actually. If you put awareness in the palm, you might notice a subtle pleasure, the hands. And interesting, the outside of the hips. Yeah, like, give it a try. There's actually a subtle, like, for some reason, there's a subtle pleasure hidden there for many people, for me. Also the pineal gland in the center of the mind, the brain. And I do find if you just put awareness there, it can be a bit much, but if you just allow that slight circling in each of these spaces, it allows enough movement to keep things from clenching up, but you can invoke that pleasure there. And then in daily life, which is important, I would say, yeah, these same recollections of loving kindness, they have to be a lot coarser. You're up against a much tougher enemy, or landscape. But yeah, bringing a prayer bead to work and like repeating words of loving kindness, taking 5-minute breaks to just recenter and reconsolidate, and acts of giving, that's the biggest. Chaga, which means to give or to give up, it's one of the first qualities we cultivate, and it's literally a synonym for awakening, the end of the path. Chaga, patinisaga, muti analio, freed. So chaga, from day one to the final day, it's like giving is such a powerful thing. And I think, yeah, when I see that, it's very beautiful. Did that help at all? Okay. Okay, we'll have to wrap stuff up in a second, but let's do one more. Yes.
You were talking about this just a little bit, but you've often listed here and there just little things that we can do and add to our lives as sort of part of a routine, or not necessarily routine, but so I'm looking at a sort of transitional phase in my life where I've got a new job and a new apartment, and I see this as a huge opportunity to create a routine, and I need routine in my life because I have a rather unstructured mind, and so it keeps things in order for me. And I've heard you list all of these wonderful things that I can add to that routine, but as soon as I leave the conversation, they just float off out of my brain, and I don't remember them anymore. So I'm wondering if you can give me some ideas, and I'm going to write them down, of things that I can hold in a routine that I'm about to build as I move into this new life routine.
Thank you, Hasa. People often, one caveat with giving that anumotana to Virginia going forth is, people should not compare their path to that. Not everyone's going to be monastic, and there's a powerful and ancient form of how to live as an upasaka, a devoted disciple of the Buddhist path. And so those structures are ancient and really powerful. The things I would suggest is get a really beautiful shrine, which I think you have. Print out pictures of the teachers who really inspire you, Jetsu, and Palmo, others. Every morning when you wake up, bow 3 times to that shrine. I would also suggest taking on 28 full-length prostrations every morning. I do that. Ajahn Kovilo does like 56 because he's extra cool. But I dedicate the merit of my life to the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. I dedicate it to my parents, to those who've cared for me, to people I know who need it. And then I am spontaneously pray to just set intention, like, may I give up this anger, may I be patient, may I be kind. And you just, for 28 bows, it takes about 4 minutes, you're just explicitly orienting your life in one direction with those are powerful bodily movements that affect the heart over time. And it's a great workout too. And yeah, we've forgotten in the West that embodied action affects the heart. So doing that, I would say 5 precepts as a basis, 8 precepts which add on not taking entertainment, not using beautification and adornment, no makeup, and no watches, no jewelry, and sleeping on the ground, so like a thermarest, once a week. That's your uposa today, that's your Sabbath. And not eating after noon if you want, if you feel like you can. And yeah, if you have 1 day a week where you kind of keep those, it's a powerful reorientation of your whole week. It shows you where you've slipped, and it kind of reorients. And to not hold that as a cold nothing, because sometimes it's quite a lot just to cut things off. But you can use that day to invite over that afternoon. Maybe you invite someone over to go for a walk, a Kalyanamitta, listen to a Dharma talk, and then you meditate for an hour and a half. Maybe in the morning you also invite people over for brunch or something before noon. Feeding people once a week, I think, is really important. Inviting people over for the meal. Visiting a monastery 3 times a year, at least. 3 times. Sravasti Abbey is just 4 or 5 hours away, people, really close. Abhayagiri is wonderful. It's free. Tell them Ajahn Nisabho sent you, as long as you don't mess anything up. Bowing last thing before you go to bed. And then 20 minutes of meditation a day at least, but honestly, I see changes in a life at 20 minutes of meditation a day, 45 minutes of meditation a day, and an hour and a half a day. And I think 2 45-minute blocks, if you can do that with your life, it will change a lot in your life very quickly. That's what I got right now, Hasa.
Thanks.
Yeah.